Hey everyone, it's Inspector Talon, and today we are going to be talking about some feature suggestions. So this is kind of following the new experimental snapshot. They've done a lot of changes to movement and that kind of thing, and I wanted to talk about what I would like to see them add along with these great bug fixes and trying to improve the intuitive nature of the carts. So, first thing I would like to see is bumping up the default cart speed. So right now it's 8 blocks per second, which is fairly slow for long distance travel, and in water it's 4, it's halved. Um, but I would really like to see them bump it up to 30 blocks per second in particular. So the reason 30 blocks per second is a good number is because it avoids issues with the cart running over hoppers. Like if you had a line of hoppers, it won't skip. And it also allows you to run a comparator signal along with the cart. If you do something like this, it's 30 blocks per second. The reason 40 blocks per second or higher wouldn't work is because you end up with hopper skipping and a lot of other problems. One of which being the balance with boats as well. So I think it's important to make minecarts be a good infrastructure option if you're trying to move a lot of items along with the player, and making ice boats be a player specific but very fast infrastructure option. So that way you kind of have pros and cons to weigh for which one would be better for any particular individual. So, with all of that being the case, I think there are a lot of reasons why 30 blocks per second is the best candidate for bumping up the speed. And particularly, I want them to bump it up to 30 for the powered rails. And that kind of introduces a problem for old tech that uses that speed, but it's good for a lot of the casuals who already have long distances of gold rails set up. And so, a way you can circumvent that particular issue is if you use or implement copper rails. So the idea here is that it would have different speeds based on the oxidation. So I can show here what like a copper rail with no oxidation would look like. Of course, I'm using commands to change the speed, but imagine this was some oxidation stage of copper rail. And then 8 blocks per second is what we used to have. So you end up with that back portable option. And then you have 6 and 4 so that you get those fine control over lower speeds. 10 blocks per second is also really nice because it allows you to run comparator lines and repeater lines without having to mess with the delay or do anything like that. So this is a much more straightforward speed, and having an option, as I mentioned before, for back portability is where you get this 2 blocks per second decrement down. I've also seen some other values suggested, but personally I'm in favor of these particular values. Now, another approach that you could take is changing the speed based on signal strength. So if I show a more ideal case here, you could kind of change the speed based on the signal strength, and you could lower it down or you can speed it way up. And the use for this in terms of an ideal case like shown is actually pretty nice. I must admit it's nice being able to adjust the signal strength. But there are some fundamental issues with this approach that kind of make it, in my opinion, not workable. So I can show here another simple case. Let me bump the speed up. So a simple case here, such as like farm collection. So if you have farm collection, before you would just have, a line of rails, and it's pretty straightforward and easy, and you power it from below with a lever, or maybe you have a redstone block or something like that. It's very straightforward to power. But if you need a particular signal strength to get a particular speed for the collection, you end up having to do something along these lines. Or there's also another alternative where you can power it like this. However, this is also kind of an annoying alternative because unless you know how to do the rail placements properly, it's directional. And that can be addressed in a different way. I'll talk about that later, but this is just not a clean solution, and this is one of the most basic situations. We can look at a more complicated situation here behind me. So these do actually jump over. I guess not at 10 blocks per second. So it requires a little bit higher speed, I suppose. But there we go. But moving forward, something that's a little more complicated, but still a fairly basic situation, is something like this selector panel. So I have a bunch of pistons here that I can select with the piston by retracting it, and then it goes to the soul sand. But this kind of has some limitations on how you can actually power this with signal strength. So this block has to be designated for a support block, and then of course below there's no way to vertically move signal strength, as well as this block is already occupied. So you can only power it in this situation from the side over here, and here are the different options that you have. And all of these are quite bulky compared to a lever and a block or a redstone block. And you, with signal strength, wouldn't even be able to use a lever or a redstone block because those are signal strength 15. So if you need a particular slower speed, you're actually forced to go with something along these lines. And this is another basic situation. Imagine whenever you start to complicate the redstone with like a whitelister for a cart MIS or something one way tileable. It's very frequent that you don't actually have the room necessary to easily power the rail, and that becomes a very big problem for implementing signal strength based rails. And you can see here, this is the size difference, and these would not be options if you need a speed lower than whatever that signal strength 15 value is. So it would become incredibly annoying to implement in tech, and it's already signal strength based, so suddenly it's more complicated to learn if you're not already familiar with redstone. So the casual experience would not really benefit that much from it, and the technical experience would be quite annoying. So I don't particularly think that this is a good change to add, unless there's some way to reconcile these issues that I'm just not seeing. But having had many discussions, it doesn't really seem like it. Intersection rails. This is something I've seen mentioned before in other suggestion videos, and I think that having it such that based on where it's powered from, it turns or something like that. Like if you had some intersection block here where it went this way because you powered it from here, I think that pretty much just offers a one block solution to an intersection like this over here. But that's not very desirable. However, I do think that if there is some block that, like a normal rail, allowed for carts to cross paths, I think that this would be very interesting and probably be nice for overlapping rails and things of that nature, and probably quite nice for the casual experience. So overall, I think if it was like a normal rail, then this would be a pretty good addition, but if it's something that changes how the cart moves, I'm not a fan. And we can look at how you would implement this for currently. So you can go diagonally if you activate 2 slices, or you could even go backwards or to the right. So you have a lot of options with a situation like this, but this is kind of obscure because of the water that's necessary. So, not to mention a little bit bulky. So it is understandable that this isn't very well known or widely used, but we do have an alternative to the intersection. Moving forward, I also think that rails, a derailing rail, would be a fairly nice addition. So here I'm using commands and detector rails, but imagine that this is some rail that derails it off to the side. And you can kind of see how it's pretty interesting for maneuvering the cart around. And I think this would have some really broad uses without having being too good at one particular thing. And also the flavor of having a rail that's kind of broken or something like that, dilapidated or however it needs to work, and then whenever you power it, it derails to the side would be very interesting. I think that it has a lot of flavor behind it and it offers a lot of utility that we don't have in an effective way like this. Um, However, you would need to be careful for something like a conveyor belt. This I don't think should be added. So perhaps making it have a slower animation or something like that would be good. This is actually a suggestion from one of the commenters under my snapshot video. So thank you for the suggestion, and I do think that this would be a great addition. Moving on to sloped rails and loops, I think that from a technical perspective, it probably wouldn't add that much. Maybe if they made it where if it is going too slowly on these kind of rails, then it falls down. That could offer some interesting routing utility. But overall, I don't think this impacts the average player, or sorry, the technical player that much. But I think it would be really good for the average player for things like roller coasters and a lot of fun stuff. So I think this would be a good addition in general. However, I don't think it would have that much technical use, at least with the way that I'm imagining it. Moving forward, I think that cart should slide on ice. It really doesn't make sense that they're not impacted by ice and don't slip across it. Um, I don't think you should be able to control the cart, but it makes a lot of sense if it would just slide on the ice. And it would allow for things like wiring situations like this, where it just slides right across, instead of having to use like soul sand or something, and this is not really that effective, and you don't have the same ability to have a support block here or something like that. So I think slipping on ice makes a lot of sense. I think it would be a great addition. And overall, I don't know why it doesn't do this already. So I would definitely like to see that. This is a suggestion from Methods. The idea is that based on what mob is inside the cart, it accelerates at a different speed. So the larger it is, the slower it accelerates. And I really, really like this idea. I think it would be a good way to implement an intentional in-game way to sort mobs. So like villagers from baby villagers, or something a little bit harder, like I don't know, baby camels from adult camels. All of that sort of thing would be very interesting if the cart accelerated at a different rate rather than what we have in game now, where they all just accelerate at the same speed. So I think it would be a pretty good addition. Next up, I've seen a lot of people ask for trains to be changed or implemented more fluidly. And personally, from a technical perspective, I don't see a problem with this. Furnace carts or trains are not widely used, maybe a little bit in certain farms, but it's not something that I think would impact all that much. And I think it would be a good addition given how frequently it's requested to be able to link carts up with chains, or have some interesting or smoother behaviors with furnace carts or something like that. And kind of piggybacking off of that, I kind of think that furnace carts should just be totally reworked. I mentioned this in my update video, and I still think that furnace carts are sorely needing a rework, and making them either operate as a furnace with some unique interaction or changing how they're fueled or something would be very interesting and make them useful. However, I have seen recommendations for making it chunk load. I don't think that's a good idea for a variety of reasons. The portal ticket or the chunk ticket scheduling is kind of awkward, so it wouldn't perfectly fix the issue. And opening up that door for lots of entities in Redstone chunk loading again is just not a good idea. Um, so personally, I don't think that they should load chunks, but they need some love one way or another. And kind of more broadly, talking about what kind of additions or minecart types would be good to add. I really like the cart types that we have. Of course, these two are creative only, but I think that if they were to add new carts, it shouldn't be like a copper cart variant or a netherite variant or something like that, because that runs into the issue of having multiple hopper carts that you now have to select from, or multiple, I don't know, TNT carts based on the speed of the copper or something like that. And you end up with a lot of options when in reality it makes more sense for the control for the speeds to be done with the rails themselves. And it also um, allows for carts to have more identity for whatever block they have. Something like a hopper cart does it perfectly, where it's really strong for taking out items and has other limitations like not being able to push items. But across the board, if they're going to add some type of cart, I think that it should kind of follow that general rule of it has unique interactions based on the block that it is holding, and is really good in a particular niche. But outside of that, I don't think that they should really add new cart types, especially copper carts or things like that. I think that it runs into too many problems with bloated options and things of that nature. And I kind of touched on this already, but allowing the rails to be broader, something like the derailer or the copper rails, have broad uses and broad utility. If it's like a one block solution, then that kind of defeats the point of having to design something. So I don't think that a one block solution for unloading a cart or a one block solution for um, particular speeds is necessarily desirable. I think that it should be harder to make those systems and have those foundations. And the rails should act as broad foundations and support for the system and tech that we have. And finally, I did mention this at the end of my last snapshot video, but I wanted to bring it up again now that I actually have Minecarts up and running. Um, I think that having shift click rails where you place them like this would be so nice. Placing them like stairs, I can place them against a block and it's a slope. And this is so straightforward, and it allows you to still have the behavior of rail placements in other ways, but it avoids how complicated and wacky it can get to set up different rail configurations. And I think it would be way better for the user. So that's all that I have here. I did refrain from talking about the TNT minecart bugs because those are really what I consider bugs rather than some feature that should be added. If you'd like more details on that, refer to my update video from a year ago. And otherwise, thank you to everybody who helped set up or set up this world or have suggestions, especially the Cartchives Discord server. We've had a lot of discussion about the snapshot there. So thank you to everybody who has pitched in to these suggestions, and I thank you all for watching.